Decision 2022. Tonight, the race for U.S. Senate, the Democratic primary debate. The top candidates take on the biggest issues facing Wisconsin. Inflation.
A lot of people are being hurt by the gas prices.
Abortion.
I think the unborn babies have a right to life.
I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I feel like it's not fair.
The rise in violent crime. Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, State Treasurer Sarah Godlewski, Alex Lasry, Outagamie County Executive Tom Nelson, and Stephen Olakara. Presented by TMJ4 News. 620 WTMJ. WIS Politics. The Milwaukee Business Journal. And Marquette University. From Marquette's Varsity Theater, here are your moderators, Charles Benson and Shannon Sims.
Thank you for joining us for tonight's Wisconsin, the only U.S. Senate Democratic primary debate.
And the candidates you see here tonight have met the debate's eligibility requirements, demonstrating a minimum and reasonable threshold of statewide public support. The debate is being broadcast statewide from Superior to Eau Claire and Madison to Green Bay. We want to take a moment right now to thank our audience that's here right now. You can see several hundred people have shown up for this debate, so we want to say welcome.
All right, let's go over the rules for tonight's debate. Candidates will have 60 seconds to answer questions and a possible 30 seconds for any follow-up questions. Now, if the candidate runs over their time, this is what you'll hear. And if an opponent refers to you in their answer, you will get 30 seconds to rebut.
So prior to the debate, we drew names to determine in order which the questions will be asked and the order of closing statements. The first question goes to Ms. Godlewski, and we begin with the number one issue in June's Marquette Law School poll was inflation. 75% of voters say they are concerned. Inflation and labor shortages are hurting businesses statewide. Now, gas prices are starting to come down, but are still well above the price at the pump from a year ago. You have criticized oil companies for their profits. What specific action would you support in Congress to lessen the burden on families and small businesses? And we would like to know how inflation has impacted your family budget.
Well, for starters, I want to to address inflation right away. And what can we do in the U.S. Senate to address inflation? Well, for starters, let's address the price at the pump. I mean, a year ago, gas was $2. Now it's well over $4. What we can do is we can actually suspend the federal gas tax and provide some breathing room for families. You know what else we can do is we can hold fossil fuel companies accountable because they're seeing record-breaking profits. We've got to stop their profiteering. But in addition to prices at the pump, what we also need to make sure that we're doing is lowering the price of prescription drugs. I'm talking to Wisconsinites, and they're literally struggling with paying for their life-saving prescription drugs. Not because they want to, because they simply can't afford it. And as a working mom, the other big thing is I want to make sure we have affordable child care and affordable senior care, and we make sure the child tax credit is permanent. This is going to give working families the breathing room that they need, and as a working mom, I'll fight like hell to get this stuff done.
All right, I didn't hear two things. One, how has inflation personally impacted your budget? And you said that you want to stop companies from profiteering. How?
Well, let's talk about my family. I mean, I was just talking to my parents today who are actually in the crowd. They're two retired public school teachers from Eau Claire, and they were talking about the price of gas. And my sister actually just had 2 babies yesterday, twins, and talking about how they're going to go drive to see them. I mean, that hurts pocketbooks. This is why my first initiative is to make sure that we suspend the federal gas tax. And then, Charles, let's get to your second question, which is about how are we going to hold these companies accountable?
I'm sorry, you got only 30 seconds on a follow-up question.
All right, this question is for you, Mr. Olakara. In addition to Wisconsin consumers seeing high cost, inflation is also impacting those who are paying for college or trying to pay off college debt, right? So, do you supporting loan forgiveness across the board to help individuals struggle with rising costs, and also share with us how inflation is personally impacting you.
Well, thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Charles. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. My name is Stephen Olikara, and I'm from Waukesha County. I'm running to change the system, and I'm the only one in this race who has federal legislative experience. And my view on this comes from an unconventional background as the son of Indian immigrants, as a musician, and as the founder and CEO of the Millennial Action Project, which grew to be the nation's largest organization of young elected legislators. And inflation has been brutal on young people and for all Wisconsinites, and the cost of groceries to diapers are going up. And I use the example of diapers because I have a baby niece named Lucy who's a major consumer of diapers. And what I would say on top of that is we need elected leaders who are focused on the root issues here, and that's what I'm doing, which is addressing the supply chain shocks that have happened as a result of the pandemic, supporting the president to use the Defense Production Act to help open up and ease the supply chain bottlenecks that we've had in this country. Thank you.
Supply chain is definitely one of the factors to inflation, but answering the question, would you support loan forgiveness across the board to help those individuals who also are battling with high cost but also paying for higher education?
It's a great question, and I'm first of all a proud graduate of UW-Madison. I'm the only Badger on this stage, and I will support any bill that's going to cancel student debt for student borrowers. But on top of that, I'm aware, as the person who has federal legislative experience, of what is passable and what's not. What I'm a big fan of is earning your way to forgiveness through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I want to call on young Americans to serve our country through AmeriCorps by being a nurse in a rural area, and that's going to allow you to open up those opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Olikara.
Mr. Nelson, you are next. Your inflation plan includes having more companies make more products in America. So how would you incentivize companies as they face rising costs, supply chain issues, and labor shortages? Also, share with us how you've adjusted your family budget due to rising costs.
Right, thank you. First of all, my name is Tom Nelson, the Outagamie County Executive. There's two questions that matter in this race. Who can beat Ron Johnson and making Joe Manchin relevant? And the only one up here who's won 6 times in a red part of the state as a legislator and as a county executive. To the question, what this country does not have that every other developed country has is a national industrial strategy. And because we didn't have it in the 1970s, American manufacture was whittled to the core. In a national industrial strategy, which encompasses my inflation strategy, we need to rebuild the supply chain, but under one roof, we need to have tax policy, trade policy, get rid of NAFTA, get rid of CAFTA, things that have hollowed out manufacturing, make sure that we have strong worker protections. We pass the PRO Act, we get rid of Taft-Hartley so that we can put workers and working families first. That's how you address that. As how it affects my family, gas prices did finally come down $4 a gallon, but that's still very expensive.
We'll leave it at that.
Mr. Barnes, this question is for you. You want to fight inflation with a middle-class tax cut. Specifically, how does your plan help families and businesses struggling with higher cost, and how has inflation impacted your wallet?
Well, absolutely. I want to thank you so much for the question. As a working class candidate, I know the impact of inflation firsthand. In fact, there have been a number of stories written about my challenges that I've faced. And that's personal to me, but it's also personal to so many people all across the state of Wisconsin and all across this country. Inflation is impacting working families while at the same time we have companies that are making record profits. Now, there are a couple things that we need to do, and we put out a plan. That includes expanding the earned income tax credit. It also includes making the child tax credit permanent. And I also think we should repeal the Trump tax plan because that was paid for by middle class families. At the same time, corporations and the most wealthy people in this country saw the bulk of that benefit. And we need to build things here in the long term so we're not subject to supply chain issues or foreign conflicts overseas that drive up costs. And then we have to hold the oil, gas companies, and also pharmaceutical companies accountable for using inflation as a smokescreen to continue to jack up prices. Now, when we build things here, we lower costs for American families and support our small businesses.
Mr. Barnes, that's your time. Thank you.
Mr. Lasry, you have the question now. You tweeted, inflation is a tax on workers driven by corporations and their greed. Be specific on how your inflation plan addresses corporate greed and how inflation has personally impacted your family budget.
Yeah, thanks, Charles, and thanks so much for the question, and thanks everyone for being here. It's an honor. You know, this has been the number one issue of our campaign, and it's been what we've been talking about since day one. which is how are we going to put more money back into people's pockets and how are we going to make more things in America? If we want to make sure that we're easing inflationary pressures and easing supply chain issues, the best thing we can do is make sure that we're raising wages and building more things here in America. And that's what our plan is called for, and that's what I have a track record of delivering on. When it came to raising wages, I've done that. We pay a $15 minimum wage in the Bucks Arena. When it comes to creating jobs, we've done that. We've created 10,000 good-paying union jobs right here in Wisconsin. The problem that we have is that we have a senator right now in Ron Johnson who has no interest in helping working class people. He passed the Trump tax cut, which raised taxes on the middle class. What it actually did was took worker deductions away that they could be using right now. We have to make sure that we're raising wages for people in this country and ensuring that we're bringing manufacturing back from overseas.
And specifically, how has it impacted your family budget?
Well, this isn't about me or anyone on this stage. This is about the people of Wisconsin and how we're making sure that we're putting money back into their pockets, how we're making sure that we're raising their wages. When I travel the state, what I hear people talking about is, how do I make sure that I'm taking home more of what I earn? And what they're saying is that Ron Johnson didn't do anything. For 12 years, he could have done something to make sure that they were helping working class people, and he hasn't done that. And that's why everywhere we go, people are saying that they want to change from Ron Johnson, and they want someone who's going to actually be able to deliver results.
Thank you. Now to our next topic, abortion. The most recent Marquette Law School poll indicated that abortion was the #2 issue among voters. 58% say it should be legal in all or most cases. 35% saying illegal in all or most cases. This question is to you, Mr. Olakara. You founded the Millennial Action Project to bridge that bipartisan divide. Abortion is a deeply personal issue that has divided many. How would you navigate the Senate in a post-Roe v. Wade world? And would you support efforts to codify Roe v. Wade?
Absolutely, I will. Thank you, Shannon. And when this decision came from the Supreme Court, it was like a gut punch. And I immediately thought about people in my life, people who I love, who had to make that painful and excruciating decision to have an abortion. And whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, those life experiences are undeniable. And I believe they deserve the freedom and the dignity to make those decisions on their own. But there's something else that happened soon after this decision to overturn Roe, and that was the flood of fundraising emails and text messages that were getting sent to you asking you for $5 or $15. And that to me was revealing of the core issue here, which is the political industrial complex is much more interested in your dollar than it's interested in your human rights. And that's why I'm running to change the system here. You have to talk about money, the primary system, and other issues if you're going to talk about how you build that consensus. I strongly believe if you're not talking about changing the system, you're wasting people's time.
Mr. Nelson, you have the next question. You say that the Senate needs to reform the Supreme Court in response to the 6-3 decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. If elected, what action do you believe your party must do to ensure women have the rights that were provided under Roe for nearly 50 years?
I'm the only one up here who is campaigning to expand the Supreme Court. And we need to expand the Supreme Court because the Republicans have stacked. Because of Donald Trump, he was able to get 3 appointments. And he was able to get 3 appointments because in 2016, people here did not turn out to vote, including Sarah Godlewski. And because of that, we have 3 Supreme Court justices. The only way to do this is to expand the Senate. By expanding the Senate, we need to elect someone from Wisconsin who could win. And go there, get rid of the filibuster, push legislation through that will expand it. And look, this has been done a couple of times in our history. It's been done 5 or 6 times. And so it is by no stretch of the imagination. It is absolutely possible. But this is something that can be traced back to our state. We did not turn out in 2016. Because we didn't turn out in 2016, we gave 3 appointments to Donald Trump. And now, women, workers, the environment will be suffering for decades.
Ms. Godlewski, you heard him call you out. You will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, as the only woman on this stage, I don't need to be lectured by any men about how important the 2016 election was. And And look, I am the only person on this stage in 2016 who left their job to join the Hillary Clinton campaign, to become the director of women's outreach, to do everything I could to defeat Donald Trump. I traveled the state organizing women and to make sure that he would not win, so I don't need to be lectured about how important this really is.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes, this question is for you. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have both called for using federal lands to provide abortions in states that are banning it. Both have endorsed your campaign. So do you support using federally owned land in Wisconsin or any state for abortions? What is your plan to protect abortion rights?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, it's a very personal issue for me. I am an only child, but I was not my mother's first pregnancy. I'm so honored that she's here in the audience today. She had a complicated pregnancy. Her health was at risk, and she had to make the decision to end that pregnancy. But it was her decision to make, and that's a decision that any woman across this country should be able to make without interference from politicians. And that's why this race is so important, because 70% of people in the state of Wisconsin agree that Roe should be the law of the land. However, and Senator Johnson, we have someone who thinks that abortions should be illegal with almost no exceptions, telling people to just go to Illinois. I can't think of a more out-of-touch position to have. Now, given the fact that this race is so important, we need to expand the majority in the filibuster and codify the right to choose into law. I think in the meantime, we have to explore every possible option to make sure that women get the reproductive health care that they need and deserve.
Your response on using federal land for abortions?
I would support any option that is within reach here that the federal government can use to make sure that abortion care is protected.
All right, next question to Mr. Lasry. What exemptions, if any, would you support to guarantee abortion rights, and how would you accomplish that in states like Wisconsin where abortions are not legal?
Well, I think what we first have to understand is that a woman's health care decision should be between her and her medical provider, not some Trump handpicked Supreme Court justice or some politician in Washington or Madison. You know, my wife, who is here, she works at Planned Parenthood. She's the chief of staff at Planned Parenthood, Wisconsin, and I see firsthand how her and her colleagues are working on the front lines, doing the heroic work to make sure that people are still able to get their health care. They're doing their part. It's now on us to do ours. And we have to now make sure that we win this election. The stakes are that high. We have to make sure that we get rid of Ron Johnson so that we can elect more Democrats around the country, to get rid of the filibuster so that we can protect a woman's right to choose, to make her own health care decisions. It's embarrassing that we have to do that, but that is the stakes of what this election is. In 2016, we saw the stakes, and it led to the Supreme Court defining what the next 20, 30 years of a generation can look like. 2022 can be that pivotal election, and that's why we have to make sure that we win.
Knowing your experience, as you mentioned, with your wife working for Planned Parenthood, is there any exemptions that you would support in order to make sure that abortion rights could be legal and codified?
Well, I would support any exemption that we can make to make sure that women have the right to make their own health care decisions. I mean, that's what this is about. We have to do everything in our power to ensure that a woman can make her own health care decisions. I mean, it's sad, but my wife and daughter woke up that morning with less rights than they went to bed with. We need to make sure that we're doing anything we can to ensure that women are allowed to make their own health care decisions the same way that men can make their own health care decisions.
Thank you. Ms. Godlewski? You have called out your own party for not codifying Roe into a federal law in the 50 years since the original Supreme Court decision. What national legislation would you back, and why should supporters trust you or the party now to get it done?
Well, for starters, to get this done in the Senate, I would get rid of the filibuster and pass Tammy Baldwin's Women's Health Protection Act that would codify Roe v. Wade and make it the law of the land. But yes, I am frustrated with my own party. You know, we've had 50 years to make Roe into law, but we've failed. And you know what, guys, I'm glad that now that Roe is overturned, you are all now sharing your own personal stories, because we all have to work together to make Roe v. Wade the law of the land. But where were you in talking about reproductive rights at a Citizen Action Forum in November? It was 2 hours long. And where were you guys talking about reproductive rights at a UW forum when they asked you what your priorities were in the U.S. Senate? You know, I wasn't the only one talking about reproductive rights because for me, this is not an afterthought. If Wisconsin wants to restore its women's rights to choose, they'll send the woman who will get the job done and defeat Ron Johnson in 2022 this November.
All right, we will move on to the next topic. This topic will include one question for all 5 candidates, and we will begin with Mr. Nelson. The fight for transgender female athletes' protection under Title IX has become a rising debate. The 1972 federal law prohibits sex discrimination in programs that receive federal funding. What change would you want to see that addresses inclusion and also protects the female athletes it was originally designed to promote?
I think that this is one of the biggest challenges, and I think one of the biggest things that I think looking back, I think about my daughter Mary, and my son George, who are here, and how we can explain the kind of demonizing that's going on right now where we are singling out people just because they might be different than us in some sort of way. This nation, we have gone through this way too many times, and I think that we should have learned the lesson. I fully support updating it to the extent that we can make sure that it is as inclusive as possible. And by that, I think we have to look at how the issues today are different than the issues maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I think that's something that has really saddled a lot of politicians. But I think the simple question here is, what can you do to make sure that things are truly just and equitable? And I think it needs to be as inclusive as possible.
Mr. Barnes, do you need me to read the question again?
I can take this right away. So I can tell you, all across the United States of America, state by state, we see these attacks on trans youth. And this is about discrimination. This is about making our youth feel as if they don't belong. And I'm here to tell you, each and every member of the LGBTQ community, especially trans individuals, especially youth, that you belong. And I will always fight for your right to belong, as I did as a member of the legislature when we were facing one of the most discriminatory bathroom bills in the entire country. But we fought back. We organized and we won. That bill did not see the light of day or become law, even with the Republican-controlled legislature, even with the Republican governor. And that's the fight that I'll take to the U.S. Senate. It should be on all of us to do everything we possibly can to make sure that our youth know that they belong. And our statutes need to be updated to reflect the realities that so many of our youth are experiencing in schools across the country. And they need to be protected from adults who act like children in legislative bodies all across this country.
Mr. Lasry, the question now to you.
If you could repeat the question.
So yeah, what changes would you want to see that address inclusion and also protects the female athletes it was originally designed to promote under Title IX?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, trans rights are human rights. And this demonization that we're seeing in Wisconsin and across the country is one that's set out to make sure that we're demonizing how people decide to identify and who they want to be. You know, when we were building Fiserv Forum, we did something as simple as possible in becoming one of the first arenas in the country to ensure that we had gender-neutral bathrooms. It's about making people feel welcome and making sure that anyone feels that they can be whoever they want. And quite frankly, that's what sports is about. Sports is about the idea of coming together with different people, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, and different identities, and competing and overcoming the ability to win. What we have to do is make sure that we're protecting our trans people just as we're protecting everyone. What we also have to make sure is that we also have to realize that this is bad for the economy. When we're arguing about whether trans people can be who they want to be, it makes us seem like a less welcoming state and makes it much harder for us to recruit and retain talent. Unfortunately, Ron Johnson is interested in doing just that.
Ms. Godlewski, you two now have that same question. What changes would you make to Title IX that would have inclusion for transgender athletes, but also protect the female athletes it was designed to promote in 1972?
Well, as a fifth-generation Wisconsinite, Wisconsin is a state that welcomes individuals. We are not a place for hate, but yet we have seen in 2021 and 2022 attacks on our LGBTQ family, including trans youth. And there's just no place for that hate. And so while thank goodness for Tony Evers, who has been able to veto these awful laws that are attacking our trans youth, we've got to get things done at the federal level. And you know, one of the things I want to prioritize in the U.S. Senate is passing the Equality Act. We have seen the Equality Act pass the House, which is providing literally federal protections on regardless of who you are and who you love. You should be protected by the law. But that's not happening right now. And when it comes over to the Senate side, it dies because of the filibuster. And when I'm talking to folks around the state of Wisconsin, they're like, why does everything die? And when you require 60 senators to move anything forward and not a simple majority, I think that's wrong. And there's no room for hate, and the Equality Act will help do that.
Mr. Olekara, you are next.
Yeah, I think we're actually missing the root issue here. But first of all, I fully support trans rights as a modern struggle for civil rights. But when I saw this issue take on national headlines, I started looking into the data on this, and I saw that, just how much, if you look at the number of trans athletes there are, it's a very, very small percentage. So why is it dominating so much airtime and so much members' time in Congress? Because they know that they can use this as a fear tactic to gin up votes and to gin up money. And that's why I truly believe that members of Congress need to be focused on really my first piece of legislation in the Senate, which is getting big money out of politics. Because the thing that the general public does not see, that I saw walking through the halls of Congress, is that these political consultants, they could care less about your life. What they care about is raising money off of you, and they know that this story about trans athletes is something that's going to scare people and gin up money. We have to fundamentally change that system at its root, and I'm the only candidate running on that issue. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to our fourth topic, which is crime. Milwaukee is on track to have its third straight year record number of homicides, and there have been 121 homicides this year, far outpacing homicides at this time in the last 2 years.
Mass shootings have also dominated headlines in the U.S. The Gun Violence Archive reports the numbers have more than doubled since 2018, with just under 700 mass shootings last year alone. We are just 17 days into the month of July, and there have already been 48 this month. The group defines mass shootings as 4 people shot in one instant. This first question will go to you, Mr. Barnes. When asked about police spending in a local radio interview, you said that there needed to be more parity when it comes to social services and police spending. Can you be very specific? How would you prioritize funding when it comes to police and social services to address gun violence?
Well, thank you so much for the question. As the only person born and raised in Milwaukee, having experienced the pain of gun violence, this is something I hope nobody ever has to deal with. I lost my first friend in high school and many more after that. That's the unfortunate reality we have. So yeah, we need to make sure law enforcement officers have the resources they need to keep us safe. But what we need to prioritize is doing the things that we know prevent crime from happening in the first place. We need to make sure that we are investing in good schools all across the state that have equity for all of our students in good paying jobs. Now, when my granddad moved to Milwaukee after serving in World War II, this was the best place for a black family. We got the strongest black middle class. But when companies like A.O. Smith shipped the good jobs overseas, not only was there a loss of those jobs, there was a loss of an opportunity for people to get ahead in life. And what filled the void was violence and crime. We know what we need to do to break the cycle of violence in communities all across America, but we need leaders who actually understand what's going on. And I'll tell you, on the first...
Well, can you give me specifics, though, how you would prioritize that funding?
Well, we need to, like I said, we need to invest just as heavily in good paying jobs. We need to invest just as heavily in schools. Our schools in Wisconsin went from 18 to number 8 since our administration took over. But we also know that there is a funding flaw when it comes to the way we fund education. If school funding is based on property tax, we are going to continue to see the inequality and inequity all across Wisconsin. We need to make sure that every child in every zip code has a fair shot at success, because that's not the reality right now.
Mr. Lazary, you'll have the next question here. Your public safety plan calls for putting more police on the streets by using federal tax dollars to help cities like Milwaukee. Would this be different than the Justice Department's COPS program, and how would additional dollars be used to prevent violence?
Yeah, I think public safety has been one of the biggest issues of this campaign and one of the biggest issues surrounding Wisconsin. And it's why I'm proud that we were the first candidate to put out a public safety plan. And it had a 3-pronged approach. The first approach was to make sure that the police have the resources they need for training, to stop and solve crimes, and to make sure that we're rebuilding trust in communities. The second prong was to make sure that we are investing in our public infrastructure, things like education, workforce training and job training, and making sure that we're updating our technologies around our streets. Also making sure, third, that we had a true gun reform bill, making sure that we're banning assault weapons and having universal background checks. The problem we have right now is Ron Johnson and Republicans want to defund our cities and defund our communities. We have to have someone in the U.S. Senate who can partner with Tammy Baldwin to ensure that we are sending federal dollars back here to Wisconsin to ensure that we can make sure that we're taking care of our communities. It's why I'm proud to have the support of the mayor and county executive and a number of other elected officials around the state, because they know I'd be the best person to D.C. to partner and send those dollars back here.
Ms. Godlewski, you have called for common sense gun laws. Can you really be specific? Would that include a ban on assault rifles? What more would you have added that was not in the bipartisan gun reform bill signed by President Biden just last month to address gun violence?
Well, the bipartisan gun violence bill was a step, but it wasn't nearly enough on where we need to be, because we have seen that violent crime, especially when it comes to mass shootings, over 300, and it's only July. And so what does common sense gun safety legislation look like? Well, for starters, we need to make sure that we're expanding background checks and closing loopholes. You know, the other big thing is we've got to have national red flag laws, because we don't want domestic abusers to be getting a hold of guns. And to your final piece, no, I do not believe we should have weapons of war in our community. Growing up in western Wisconsin with a family of hunters, I will tell you, in talking to my dad about this issue, if you need an AR-15 to go hunting, go back to target practice, because that is not what this is about. And regardless of where you live, no one should be worried about a mass shooting, whether it's at school, your place of worship, or even right here in a theater.
So just to follow up, because you say we don't need weapons of war, does that mean we need a ban on assault rifles?
Absolutely, we need to ban assault weapons.
Mr. Olekara, the George Floyd Act has yet to pass the Senate. It would increase police accountability and remove qualified immunity shielding for police officers from civil lawsuits. A non-starter for Republicans. What would you support to get this bill passed and help reduce gun violence?
Thank you. I would support this bill, but what I want to say, especially in relation to what we've been hearing here, is just saying nice things on the stage. There's a huge gap between that and actually passing legislation through Congress. I'm the only one on the stage who's been directly involved in passing gun violence prevention legislation through Congress. And this was after the horrific Parkland shooting. Those extraordinary young people who came to Washington, and we worked with them, and they said, we're not here because we're Democrats or Republicans. We're calling on the conscience of our nation to say that young people shouldn't go to schools with the threat of gun violence. And so we said something very simple, bringing together Democrats and Republicans, that the Centers for Disease Control should be authorized and funded to study gun violence as a public health issue. We passed that through both chambers of Congress, gotten it signed into law, the first gun violence prevention bill in over 2 decades. That's what real change looks like. I want to go further than that, including universal gun licensing. If you need a license to drive a car and get training and pass a test, you should do the same thing for a gun.
So what are you referring to when you say we did this? How did you do this? I mean, there was lots of people involved. So what was your role that got this?
Absolutely.
What is your role?
My organization, Millennial Action Project, organizes a bipartisan caucus of young members called the Future Caucus. We brought together Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy and Congressman Carlos Curbelo, Democrat and Republican, both from Florida, to work with these students and come up with a solution. And we did something that's probably common sense in your life, which is if you want people to be bought into something, bring them in early, develop solutions together. That's the difference between real change and just talking about it. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson? In the state legislature, you voted against concealed carry and opposed immunity for gun manufacturers. How would you approach any new gun laws in the Senate for those who can legally own guns and for those who should not possess firearms?
Well, and you're right, because I'm the only one here on this stage that has made that kind of difference, and that's something that I'm proud of. And the other thing, too, though, is those were 2 votes against gun manufacturers and concealed carry that was not popular in my district. Now, it's one thing to come from a blue part of the state to do something that's popular for Democrats, quite another to come from a red part of the state, stand up and do the right thing. So I've been through the ringer. I've taken tough votes on this issue because it's an important issue. I drop my kids, Mary and George, off at school every day, and I think, what if this is the next Parkland? What if this is the next Sandy Hook? And it is criminal that we have people like Ron Johnson out in Washington that are doing nothing to keep us safe, my family and your families. What I support unequivocally, I support red flag laws, I support expanding background checks, I support a ban on assault weapons, waiting periods, whatever it takes to keep our families safe, because I will never, ever, ever compromise on the safety of my community and certainly not my family.
All right, we will move on to foreign policy and agriculture. China is Wisconsin's 3rd largest trading partner with $2.6 billion in goods and services shipped in 2021 alone, including Wisconsin growing soybeans, ginseng, and cranberries. How would you navigate U.S.-China relations, and what steps would you take to protect our state's agricultural economy? This question is for Mr. Lazary to start, but all of you will have to answer as well.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we need to do is make sure that we're creating a market and an economy that's working, right? Our rural economies have been hurting, and our rural farmers have been hurting as well. When I traveled to Wausau and went to a ginseng farm, they talked about the fact that they were having trouble not just exporting because of Trump's trade wars, but also finding workers, right? This is a 2-part system that we have to make sure that we're fixing. Ron Johnson and Donald Trump made it a lot harder for us to give out farm work permits, made it a lot harder for us to create worker visas. We have to make sure that we're reforming our immigration process that includes a pathway to citizenship, but also making sure that we're creating more temporary worker permits and more farm permits so that we can have the ability to grow and develop our rural economies, that we have the workers that we need. It's why we put out a rural ag plan that's going to help jumpstart our economies and ensure that we're making sure that everyone's playing by the same rules, right? We have to make sure that in our trade deals and everything that we're doing, that everyone's playing by the same rules so that our economy can compete.
Thank you.
Ms. Godlewski. You want to repeat the question?
Sure.
All right. So how would you navigate U.S.-China relations, and what steps would you take to protect our state's agricultural economy?
Well, as the only one on this stage with national security experience, I spent almost a decade working for and supporting the Pentagon. I will tell you, this is actually something I think a lot about. And yes, we've got to change our relationship with China. And part of that is making sure we buy American right here and strengthen our own supply chain. I mean, our United States government is worth over $600 billion of purchasing power, but yet China is #1 in manufacturing. We've got to make sure that we are buying American materials and using union labor to get the job done. The second big thing is we've got to make sure we have fair trade agreements. We know right now China cheats, and that's a problem. And look, when we look at Ron Johnson, the other big thing is that China is out-competing us, and there was a bipartisan competition bill in the U.S. Senate that would help make the United States competitive when it came to chips and electronics. And you know who voted against it? Ron Johnson. And so he does not care about our national security or our economy, and I'll change that.
So how would you address trying to go, and if China is doing something or not playing fair, how do you go after China but knowing it could impact Wisconsin farmers and manufacturers?
Well, for starters, it goes back to making sure we have fair trade agreements. I think we can literally write the rules in the way that we want them to work, and we're not doing that. I think the other big thing is we've got to make sure that we are using our resources here to keep us more competitive. That is not also something that we are doing, and I will tell you, Ron Johnson is not advocating for this.
Mr. Olakari, again, the question is, knowing that we have farmers here who depend on China's export, how would you navigate to create and protect those here in the Senate?
Yes, thank you. Well, I've spent significant time in China, and I do want to give a shout out to the Wasa ginseng farmers who are supporting our campaign. And I think the key to China, first of all, my foreign policy is called dignity for all. And so what that means is in any discussion about China, we need to first talk about calling out the human rights abuses with the Uyghurs in China, because we need to be standing on principle. But we also need to be building environmental and economic partnerships. The reason why I spent time in China is because I believe we cannot solve global climate change without the United States and China working together. And on top of that, the reason why I believe in dignity for all is because we need a true anti-war U.S. senator. There is significant influence from the military-industrial complex right now. I'm calling to disrupt those funding sources directly to Congress and ensure that we end all the endless wars across the world. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson.
We have allowed the Chinese to eat our lunch, and for too long. I appreciate this question, though, but, instead of worrying about the Chinese and their markets, what we have done that was fundamentally gone wrong here in Wisconsin is that we are focused on trade. We've had big ag and corporations selling out the small dairy farmer. In the last 20 years, we've lost 85% of our dairy farms. What this state needs is it needs a growth management system so that we can be self-sustainable, so we are not on the whims of any foreign market. We need to be self-sustainable. I'm the only one that came out with a food sovereignty bill that is calling on Congress to bust up big ag, to have a strategic grain reserve, to have growth management so that we can have farmers, we can have family farmers survive. But we need to be tough with China. I mean, if we allowed them to do to us militarily what they've done to us economically, we would have been to war a long time ago.
Mr. Barnes.
Well, thank you so much. I can tell you exactly what bad trade deals have meant for the American worker. I can tell you what bad trade deals have meant for the city of Milwaukee specifically. Since I only have a minute, you don't have to go too far from this campus to see what has happened. And that's why we have to crack down on those bad trade deals. We have to crack down and remove those tax incentives that allow companies to send good jobs overseas, because as the American worker has lost out, corporations and the wealthy among us have seen the bulk of the benefit that should be coming down to all of us, but it's not. And we need more people in Washington, D.C. with working class experience. It's a millionaires club that quite frankly needs to be broken up. Now, with that being said, our Barns for Barns tour has led to one of the most substantial rural plans in this entire campaign. That means cracking down on the monopolization that has made it more difficult for our family farmers to compete. We lost on average one per day last year. This is the case last year, this is the case before that. And even before that, it's a trend that will not slow down. But we have people like Ron Johnson who are more than willing to help us send good jobs overseas, more than willing to stand up for big ag instead of standing up for our family farmers.
Mr. Barnes, your time is up. Thank you.
But how would you, Mr. Barnes, but the follow-up here is China. We're sending these goods to them. Farmers, manufacturers are benefiting. So what is it that you do that says, how do you get China to play by the rules, knowing that it could have an impact?
We are the largest economy in the entire world. No trade deal happens unless we say so. And if we continue to have these bad trade deals that put us on the back burner just because we might see some benefit somewhere, but on the whole, we're losing out, we're in trouble. And this has been going on for generations. It's exactly why we see, to the last question, the rise in crime, because factories are shutting down, good jobs are leaving because we have corporations who are seeing the bulk of that benefit from these trade deals. It's not our family farmers that are seeing the benefit.
We'll leave it at that. We're moving on to environment. Ms. Godlewski, President Biden wants to end fossil fuel subsidies. What incentives to oil, gas, and coal companies would you end right now, and what would be your timeline to reduce greenhouse gases?
Well, for starters, we absolutely need to make sure that fossil fuel companies aren't getting that sweetheart deal that they are right now, where they're literally annually getting over $20 billion a year in tax subsidies. And that's wrong, because we need to make sure we're transitioning from brown energy to green energy. You know, for starters, 80% of our state runs on brown energy and only 20% runs on green energy. We are a leading manufacturing state. We can actually use our manufacturing backbone to help produce green products that are going to contribute to ending emissions. And so for me, that's a start. You know, I was talking with actually a large manufacturer in northeastern Wisconsin, and 90% of what they produce is for the combustion engine. They want to actually transition to the clean economy and making those parts for whether it's for wind or solar, but they need a partner in the federal government to do that. And look, in my time as state treasurer, my first major action was overturning a Republican gag order on climate change and starting investing in renewable energy projects across the state. That's exactly how I'll lead in the U.S. Senate.
But what incentives to these companies, oil, gas, coal, would you give them to help them shift?
Can you repeat the question? I did
Sure, not a problem. I said, what incentives to oil, gas, or coal companies would you give right now to help them shift and reduce greenhouse gases?
Well, I think part of it is making sure that workers specifically are the ones that are helping in that transition. So how I would set it up is I would say, to whether it is coal or oil, what are you doing to make sure that these workers are able to transition to the manufacturing jobs they need to produce, whether it is solar or hydro or wind? I think that's what's really important, is at the end of the day, it's not about corporations, it's about the workers. So we need to make sure that these incentives are building in the workers' best interests.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Olakara, you were an advisor, according to your resume, on a plan that provided solar power to millions of homes in Africa. In Wisconsin, about 1% of the state's electricity comes from solar. What additional steps are needed to scale solar energy, especially in lower income urban and rural areas?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the earliest pieces of political activism I did was working with Van Jones on a basic idea, green jobs, not jails. And I want to talk about climate here because I believe that leadership is required on this issue. Taking on climate change has been a calling of mine since I was in college. I believe it's the holy grail to pass through the U.S. Senate. And I'll tell you what leadership is not. Leadership is not sitting on a task force producing a report that doesn't go anywhere. What leadership is passing bipartisan clean energy funding through the U.S., through Congress, which is what I've done, through the Future Caucus that I was referencing earlier. But I want to go even further than that. I have the boldest climate plan on this stage, and that is a 100% clean electricity standard by 2030 to incentivize clean energy entrepreneurs and the private sector to accelerate their transition to clean energy. I also know a lot of clean energy entrepreneurs who need greater incentives and credits to ensure that they can get their products to market. So those are issues I'll actually lead on and pass in the Senate.
So just to follow up on that, you know that solar energy hasn't really taken off here in Wisconsin. You talk about these incentives. Specifically, what incentive would you require or provide that would get more people to buy in?
Well, I mean, to your point that we do have some solar technology here in Wisconsin. We also have wind and many other technologies. I think the key for a government policy here is not to be picking winners or losers, but the government needs to be on the side of the problem solvers, not the problem makers. And that's why all of the programs coming out of the Department of Energy, whether it's the ARPA-E program for breakthrough technologies, whether it's the loan guarantee program, all of those need to be focused on clean energy, reducing carbon emissions, while not picking winners or losers, allowing private entrepreneurs to find those best solutions. So I might mention UW Energy Institute.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Nelson, you are next. What would be a realistic timetable to address the effects of greenhouse gases? What steps would you back to advance renewable energy, and would it include incentives for fossil fuel companies to make the switch?
I think the first thing we need to do, I'm the only one up here who is aggressively campaigning on a Green New Deal. We need to do a Green New Deal because we have no choice. I believe in the social contract that says that we need to fix these problems for the next generation, and we have really screwed up on this one. So a Green New Deal is going to go to the core of this problem, but the genius of the Green New Deal can only happen here in Wisconsin, or start here, because in order to accomplish those objectives, we have to retool the economy, and you do that with labor. And this is the birthplace of the modern-day environmental movement through Gaylord Nelson. This is also one of the top manufacturing states in the country. That's how you accomplish it. But the question about the oil companies, look, this is what I think we need to do. We need to cut to the chase about these tax credits and so forth. We need to nationalize the oil industry. And we have done that many times before in other industries and businesses, because I think it is embarrassing to have the President of the United States go to Saudi Arabia to kiss the ring, fist bump a prince who has ordered the execution of a reporter
We'll leave
and
it at
illegal.
that. You're referring to President Biden.
Yes.
All right.
Mr. Barnes, you chaired the state's climate change task force that recommended avoiding new fossil fuel infrastructures here in the state. How do we transition to renewable energy without driving up the cost of gas?
Well, let me tell you a little story about catalytic converters first and foremost. Now, I speak often about my dad working third shift on an assembly line. His job was to assemble catalytic converters. We only needed those after the Clean Air Act was implemented. We needed lower emission standards for vehicles. The catalytic converter is how we made that transition. Now, with that being said, although my dad might like to say it was him doing it by himself, it was him, his brother, and thousands of other people across the state of Wisconsin who got good-paying union jobs when Congress took bold action to address the climate crisis. Now, as far as our work on the task force, for the very first time in the history of the state of Wisconsin, we have a clean power plan that was written in conjunction with our Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. It was written with labor and also other environmental advocates to come up with a bold, comprehensive solution. And we are on a track for the first time. This has never happened before. And with that being said, we have people like Ron Johnson who still say that climate change is BS. And so we need to get rid of Ron Johnson to end the fossil fuel subsidies and any politician who profits off of their holdings in oil and gas companies.
Mr. Barnes? But again, the question is, in the transition to renewable fuels, how do you not drive up the cost of gas, making that shift?
Well, I'll tell you, this is not a light switch. This is turning a dial. And the fact is, we have more oil and gas permits than ever before right now. We need to focus on that transition to renewable energy, and that's also why our administration put substantial money into electric vehicle transportation infrastructure to make it easier for people who may have range anxiety when it comes to buying an electric vehicle. People should be able to make the smart decision, and they should also have help from the government who should be making the smart decision, not just for this country, but for our entire globe.
Mr. Lasry, you will have the final question here. You support stringent environmental guardrails on corporations to address climate change. Be specific. What kind of protections are you talking about? And what actions do you support to reduce our carbon footprint?
Yeah, I think climate change is going to be one of the defining issues of our generation, right? We have to make sure that we've got a planet that we can live on in the next 20, 30 years. And that's why what we've done is we've been able to show that there doesn't have to be this false choice between creating good-paying union jobs and ensuring that we're protecting the environment. What we can do is make sure that we are bringing those types of good green manufacturing jobs right back here to Wisconsin. It's something that we've helped show, right? Fiserv forms one of the most environmentally friendly arenas in the country. But right now, we've got a problem where most of our solar panels and wind turbines and electric car batteries are manufactured overseas. We've got to make sure that we're incentivizing to bring those manufacturing jobs back here. We've got to invest in workforce training to ensure that we can be building those things here and make sure that Wisconsin becomes the leader and innovator in new types of green manufacturing. These would be good-paying union jobs. The issue right now is Ron Johnson's in the U.S. Senate who only cares about making sure that fossil fuel companies and oil companies are getting the dollars that they want.
Thank you. We'll leave it there. Wow, time has flown. It is now time for the closing argument portion of our debate. The Marquette Law School poll found that more than 1/3 of Democratic primary voters are still undecided in who they will vote for. With that in mind, we begin closing statements. Mr. Lasry, why should voters pick you August 9th?
And there'll be no rebuttals here.
Well, thank you all for having us, and thank you for hosting this debate. Since day one, I've been running as a Make It in America Democrat on trying to make sure that we have someone in Washington who can get things done. And I've got that proven track record. We didn't just talk about raising wages, we did it. We didn't just talk about creating jobs. We created 10,000 good-paying union jobs and brought investment here to this state. We're also the only campaign to have a unionized campaign staff. These issues matter to us. Ron Johnson, unfortunately, has only been working to pass a tax cut for himself and ensure that it's easier to ship jobs overseas and try to overthrow an election. When I think about my daughter Eleanor, who's 11 months old, I'm not thinking about November. I'm thinking about 10, 20 years from now. Will she be living in Ron Johnson's Wisconsin, where women can't make their own health care decisions, where kids are living in fear of gun violence and workers are being left behind every day? Or will she live in the Wisconsin that we know and love and fear is slipping away? I'm asking for your vote because together we can make sure that we're not just fighting for these values, but we're delivering.
Mr. Barnes.
Well, thank you so much. Again, I'm Mandela Barnes, proudly running for the U.S. Senate, quite simply to rebuild the middle class. The middle class that gave me an opportunity to stand on this stage as your lieutenant governor. As a son of a third-shift assembly line worker and a Milwaukee public school teacher, my story is only possible here in the state of Wisconsin, a state that I've traveled proudly, learning every day that we have so much more in common with one another in all 72 counties than we'll ever have with an out-of-touch, ultra-wealthy politician like Ron Johnson. Now, we have people who don't even understand the issues or the struggles of inflation, but my struggles are the struggles of people all across Wisconsin. That's why I am the only Democrat, the only person on this stage leading Ron Johnson with independent voters. I am the strongest candidate to beat Ron Johnson. I'm not here to tell you it's going to be easy. But it wasn't easy 4 years ago when we got rid of Scott Walker with the highest midterm turnout in the history of the state. But what I am here to tell you is that with your help, I promise you, we will beat Ron Johnson.
Mr. Nelson, you are next.
The only thing that matters is who can beat Ron Johnson in making Joe Manchin irrelevant. I'm the only one up here from a red part of the state who's won election, re-election 6 times, 3 as a legislator and 3 as a county executive. I did in Joe McCarthy's hometown. If you want to win a purple state, you have to win in the red part of the state. My experience is your experience. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood. In my case, it was on Carolyn Drive in Little Chute, Wisconsin. And on that block, all the dads worked at paper mills except for my dad, who's here with us today. He wore a white collar. He was a Lutheran minister. So I learned 2 important lessons. Number 1, the importance of serving your community. And number 2, in time, that there's a lot of people who work hard, play by the rules, pay their taxes, but they can't get ahead because there's too much money and too much power concentrated in just a few hands. That is wrong. Send me to Washington, and I'll work day and night to fix it. To learn more about our campaign and the differences among the candidates, go to scorecard2022.com.
Mr. Olakari, this is your moment.
Well, thank you to our moderators. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. And thanks to everyone who helped me get on this stage. I wouldn't be here without you, especially thanks to my family that's here today. I believe we need a U.S. Senator who's going to fundamentally change the system and put an end to the dehumanizing politics of people like Ron Johnson. That's why I'm the only candidate on this race who's calling to ban members of Congress from fundraising while Congress is in session. So they're actually working for you and not the big money special interests. And by the way, I'm going to commit to that and practice that before that legislation even gets passed. Now, I can imagine when you hear this, you think that this new model of politics, it sounds idealistic. But I want you to know that this is the most practical way to make change, and we've been doing this for the last 10 years. Over 200 bills introduced, 35 passed through Congress with bipartisan support. I'll leave you with this. I believe the number 1 question you should ask before voting for any candidate is who's prepared to lose their job over doing what's right. I'm prepared to lose my job to do what's right because this campaign is not about me, it's about you. I ask for your vote. We're going to shock the world on August 9th. Thank you.
Mrs. Godlewski.
As the daughter of 2 public school teachers, my parents always said, when you see something wrong, you've got to stand up and you've got to do something about it. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm running to defeat Ron Johnson because it's clear he doesn't care about our state anymore. I want to make sure, for starters, we protect a woman's right to choose and restore Roe v. Wade. I want to make sure as a working mom we have affordable child care and affordable senior care. And I want to tackle the climate crisis. And look, I will stand up to big pharma and big oil to lower our costs. And people can talk about, we know the number 1 priority is to defeat Ron Johnson. And look, polls are theoretical. I'm the only candidate on this stage that has won Ron Johnson's county, which isn't easy. In 2018, I am also the only candidate that flipped and won 9 Trump counties. That was more than the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. And look, at the end of the day, you have to be a 72-county candidate to win. I'm ready and the woman that will defeat Ron Johnson this November.
I want to thank all the candidates on the stage. I want to thank you at home for watching us tonight. Primary election is August 9th. And for the crowd here, thank you for joining us.
Our thanks to the candidates, and don't forget to vote. And don't forget, we'll be back here next Sunday with the Republican candidates for governor.
Good night.